It's only the second day of negotiations today. Yesterday was very much a kind of getting started, all the formalities. Today, we're actually getting down to business. We've seen the Kyoto Protocol plenary open, and we've also seen the long-term cooperative action plenary open. I think behind the scenes what we're seeing is some emerging tensions, particularly between African countries and developed countries, the least developed countries, around frustration around the lack of climate finance that is available. And this is a very real problem and a very real situation, because we face basically a fiscal cliff in that at the end of 2012 there is no money for climate finance, which means there is no money for poor communities around the world to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And this is an issue that Oxfam is extremely concerned about. It's an issue that we're following, and this COP is going to be very much a finance COP, as well as a COP that's going to look at the Kyoto Protocol, the necessary continuation of the Kyoto Protocol, and also how we progress towards an agreement in 2015 that's under the Durban Platform for Action.
And I guess Kyoto is important because you maintain those rules and regulations, but is what you're saying that actually the finance is what's going to deliver that ambition in the short term?
Look, it's both. Finance is crucial. A second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol is also critical. It's a political and a legal bridge to a future agreement. It also shows a willingness of developed countries, who are the most responsible for climate change, to actually take global action and to take some leadership. Now, I know people will say that the Kyoto Protocol only covers 17% of emissions globally, and that's true, but it's a crucial political and legal bridge, and we need to reduce emissions. So wherever we can reduce emissions, we should be doing so.
In terms of the finance, because I know Oxfam released a report, I think it was yesterday, focusing on that sort of fiscal cliff. What sort of innovative solutions do you think there are out there to get round what at the moment appears, and I guess it's quite appropriate in Qatar, but like a desert in terms of money trickling in from anywhere? So what kind of innovative measures would you like to see put on the table?
Sure. So first I would say that the cost of inaction on climate change is far greater than the cost. So, and there's numerous studies that show us that. So we have to act even if it costs money, because to not act now is going to cost more later. In terms of sources of finance, in Copenhagen there was an agreement that by 2020 there would be $100 billion a year of climate finance. Now, we need to start scaling up towards that, and obviously some of that needs to come from developed countries. But we also know that many developed countries are experiencing their own financial issues at the moment. So we also need to see predictable, dependable, long-term sources of finance. Two examples of that are an emissions trading, a levy or a tax on shipping and aviation. And the other, I mean, there are many possibilities, but the other example would be a financial transaction tax that would, you would be able to tax financial transactions globally. Like we're talking about the huge volumes of money that fly around the world, and that you would put a percentage of around 25% of that into the Green Climate Fund to look at adaptation for poor people in developing countries, and in particular women.
Do you think that this is going to be the right forum to discuss that? Is it possible there might be a, a finance pledging conference next year or something similar to kind of keep on driving, keep the pressure up on countries to deliver?
I think we need to see some serious commitments here on process for pledging money. I'm not sure what that would look like. It could take the form of a pledging conference. It could take many other forms. But I think what's important is that we don't delay decisions. I think that if you want to see progress here in Doha, progress towards an agreement in 2015, you want to see a second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol locked in, you want to see developing countries retain faith in this process. The key to that is finance. So we do need to see that happening. We do need to see some solid commitments on a process to deliver that that money, and that could take several forms, but concrete agreements on that are critical.
And in terms of trust, what role do organisations like yourselves play in, I guess, building trust between all the different elements in the negotiating chamber? Because you're from Australia, I'm hoping you're Australian, I've got your accent right.
That's correct.
And you know, the developed countries, you've got a big team here from the UK. What role do you guys play in reassuring developing countries that, look, you're not forgotten and we are rooting for you?
Yeah. Well, Oxfam is an international aid and development organisation. Our focus is on reducing poverty, dealing with the structural causes of poverty. So we're very much come at these talks and the other work we do in our work around the world from that perspective. We try to release research. You mentioned our research on fast start finance, which was very important. It showed that only about 43% of the fast start finance funds was new, and then in terms of additional, it was about up to 33%. So we try to release research that shows what the situation is, support where we can to support developing countries and the issues that they're raising, because they're critical to alleviating poverty around the world, and also lobby developed country governments, including my own, to make it my own, which is Australia, although I'm not here in an Australian capacity, to make sure that they live up to their responsibilities and deliver what's needed, both to reach a safe agreement to keep global warming within safe limits, but also so that we don't exacerbate the conditions of poverty.
Okay, final question. So we're going to talk about climate and gender. We've heard today already, this is on the Tuesday, this is Climate and Gender Day here in Doha. We've heard a lot about why it's important. Can you give me 2 to 3 things you would like to see happen that would actually ensure that in 12 months' time we're not still talking about, you know, why it's important and what we should do about it? What sort of 2 to 3 quite simple things could we see happen, you know, in this process or outside to ensure that this issue, we're actually seeing action?
Okay, I'm going to give you one. Okay, I'll just answer the question. So I think on a technical level, in terms of the Green Climate Fund, we need to see women represented on that fund. We also need to see principles and guidelines that go what we call the last mile, so that you're able to any money that you're dispensing, any guidelines that you're apply to the most vulnerable members of the community. And that's usually women and children. Not always, but it's mostly women and children. So there's some very tangible things that the Green Climate Fund can do to make sure that women are represented, to make sure that the money goes where it's needed, and in particular to make sure that some of that money goes to women. So that's something very tangible. The other issue is tangible but bigger picture. We need to reduce emissions. Now, I know that sounds both simple and a flyaway statement, but it's critical, because unless we reduce emissions, we're going to continue to see food supplies affected, natural resources affected. You know, women are more responsible for feeding their families. Women have to walk further for water if water starts to dry up. There's an example in Senegal where the water dried up by about 35% and women had to walk much further. Women are also the first affected by droughts. The third thing that I would say, I'm sorry, I meant to say women are the most affected by natural disasters. And in Bangladesh in the early 90s, 5 times more women than men died in a natural cyclone there, and we've seen other examples like that. The last thing, in terms of, to go back to the finance question, the world's already warming and the impacts are already being felt by communities on the ground, and in particular women. We need finance to be going to adaptation, to communities, so that they can be more resilient, and so that in particular women are able to feed their families, because it's primarily still women's responsibility to make sure that their families are fed.